So, Pastor Lou, you guys were established back in 1866.
Yes.
And it's 2024 now, and you guys are still a strong pillar in the Houston community.
Yes.
Speak about how far you guys have come and what you guys are looking forward to in the future.
Yes, I think when we talk about how far we've come and what has allowed us to do that, first it is through the sovereign eyes and the sovereign plan of God. To know that He has established us and rooted us here in this very spot for over 158 years. We're looking to use that history of ours, that legacy. It is the tenacity of our founding fathers, our former enslaved ancestors, their love for God, their love for community that still resonates and reverberates through this entire campus. And it is one that we use as a propulsion mechanism to move this church even to the next 158 years.
Wow. So what role would you say that your church specifically, the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, has played in Black history in Houston?
Well, when you look at our role as a church in African American history, our history is intertwined in American history. Our church as 158 years. Again, I tell people we're 30 years younger than the city, 20 years younger than the state of Texas. So that history, American history, is born and is presented in our very own church and community history of Freedmanstown. So what that means is that we can bridge the past, tie it to the present, but then, as I mentioned earlier, use that to move forward with laser-focused vision and a determination that was handed down to us over the generations from our former ancestors. And I'll say that we have a congregation here today. Many of our members grew up in this church. Many of these families who were founding families of our church. We look to those families, those members of this congregation, to be that beacon of light for those of us who are coming behind them and our next generation. So it's just wonderful to be used and carry all of what we carry into the future.
Yeah. You spoke a little bit about those founding members and you guys as founder. Can you share with us a little bit more about that and the history that those founders had to triumph through to get here?
Yes, yes. What is amazing to me about our founding ancestors is that in 7 months, they went from their chains of bondage to this church. That shows me that in spite of the adversity and the challenges that plagued them for generations, they found a focus and a knowledge of God and a love of God and community, right? That was poured in starting this church. 9 freed, enslaved ancestors of ours, along with some of our white counterparts in the religious community, helped start our church. And I think that's significant because it showed how cultures came together, how different people, races, nationalities came together to establish not only this church, but the school that was started here, some of the programs that was started here. So we are a church that carries the legacy of its Black history. But understand and make no mistake that we are a church that is rooted and grounded in American history that encompasses all people. And we try and tell that story today, and we use that to welcome everyone into our sanctuary.
Now, what are some of the notable visitors that you all have had in these pews?
Oh, we have had quite the lineage of guests and even members that would come to our church. I can go back to Jack Yates, who was our first pastor. I can go to Richard Allen. I can go to the Norris family, who has been a staple in this community, in this area of town. I can go to the Beatty family, who's a gentleman who's 86 years old, and his grandfather was a member of this church, which meant he would have had to been born in the 1870s. And so we have that legacy. Fast forwarding, you had the likes of a John Chase, who was the first architect to graduate from the University of Texas, Earl Campbell of the Oilers, you had Robert Harris, the astronaut. So you have a lot of people who made an impact, not only in the community and in the world, but to know that their spiritual foundation was established and even matured here at this church. It's phenomenal. So I'm excited to see what God is going to do next with some of the young folk that we have and how they will make their impact in the world coming out of this church.
Yeah. If you could ask a few questions or have a conversation with you all's founding pastor, Jack Yates, what would you say? What would you ask him? If he were here in this room right now, how do you think he would look at your ministry?
You know, I would think that he would have had to have been pleased with the direction that we are moving in as a church. Jack Yates was a man before his time. As a slave, learned the ability to read and write, astronomy. He was in business. As a slave, he handled some of the business transactions for the slave owner, going into town, purchasing goods and services, reporting back, keeping the books, those kinds of things, preaching and teaching the gospel message. And born in 1828 in Virginia, only to 38 years to be the first pastor of this church, he took what he learned then and poured it not only in our church, but as the father of Freedmanstown, he established businesses. He taught people how to read and write. He offered assistance wherever it would be. So that vision that I think that carried with him from Virginia, his experiences in working together and working with others, this is who we are as a community today. This area, Freedmanstown, 4th Ward, Texas, demographically is changing. And God has blessed us with the opportunity, with the history and legacy that we have, that can afford and go along with that change as we open up our doors to all people. So, you know, I would ask Jack Yates if I had the opportunity to sit with him just for a minute. I would ask, as he became the first pastor, coming out of the turmoils of slavery, an unstable government, being the civil war that had just ended, how would he have packaged his vision for this church, but not only his vision, but incorporate the vision of the congregation and the community to propel it to the status and where we are as a church. I think what keeps me up at night is to be the pastor of such a historic church, but also how do we as a church stay relatable? The times are changing. Church is a living organism, which meant that God knew that it would have to change as time went on and as the generations changed. But technology is incorporated now, and things move a lot faster than they did in the past. And I'm just blessed to have been afforded this opportunity to serve as its 14th pastor.
Wow. That's a wealth of knowledge.
Oh, yes.
So this month, for our Black History Month series, we're working to bridge the gap between what Black history was and what Black history is with our current Black leaders.
Yes.
And so I would say you kind of covered this topic a little bit, but how is your church working on honoring the past, honoring these artifacts and this wonderful edifice that you have, but also looking forward to the next generation so that we can continue to keep the legacy alive?
Yes. What our main goals and focuses here as a church is to be that church of the community. When we look again at our history, we have to intertwine it with American history, which means that my history is a part of your history. And in bringing, and we're using our legacy, our campus as a teaching tool to help bridge those gaps. We're using it as a teaching tool for our young folks and youngsters in the community to teach them that through hard work and tenacity, through working with others, even it's outside of your comfort zone or your own race, which this church did, you can accomplish big things. And so we're trying to tie the past and the legacy of who we are as a church, a historic church, integrate that into our present, but also use it to move forward. We are educating so many people, black, white, green, or gray, I can tell you, of who our church is. And I'm just in awe of how our history and legacy have been just welcomed by so many people in this community. So it's a good thing that you guys are doing this story. I want to pay tribute to you. Because as a young person, a career woman who is doing big things, to have that vision and to have that question resonate and then seek out to expose the story, the relatable stories to that, to share it with the community, hats off to you.
Thank you. Earlier you said something that resonated with me. You said from the chains to the church.
Yes.
Speak about when I say those words, what does it mean to you?
Yes, when I speak to from chains to the church, I am talking about what enveloped a people just coming out of slavery, fresh chains and out of bondage. Upon their emancipation of June 19th, 1865, 7 months. It took them 7 months to move from their chains to a church. Now, when you think about the impact that is for a people who, in spite of what they had gone through, what they had been through generationally, to have a love for God and to give him thanks in such a way that the first thing you do is to buy property and build and establish a church. I can only think how God must have been pleased that they offered the first fruits of their freedom back to him in 7 months. And so when you ask, how can we as a church be around for 158 years? I think the answer is buried in their movement and the motivation of their faith that took them from the chains to the church in 7 months.
Wow.